Eric Weisinger, I really appreciate your time today and the generosity of spirit with which you make wine and host the community at Weisinger Family Wine. Thank you for talking to me today for Slow Wine USA 2020-2021. Can you tell us how your winery got started, the dates, kind of the details of your family history?
Sure. First, I just want to thank you, though, Maureen, for the opportunity. It's always great to see you. So we started planting grapes in 1978. It was my father who started our business. I was about 10 years old and really didn't have any idea at that time what an impact grapes and wine were going to have on me. We planted about 1.5 acres of Gewürztraminer that first year. It was a variety that my father was convinced was going to become the future of Southern Oregon. He and I now joke that fortunately he was wrong. We were amateur growers, or he was an amateur grower, and he and I were amateur winemakers for a very long time. In 1988, he made the decision to sort of commit and built this winery, which I'm now sitting in. 1988 was our first harvest. We produced 3 wines. We produced a rosé of Cabernet, an Alsatian style Gewürz, and a little red wine blend that we call and still call Mescalari. And it was this unique blend. I don't think one's ever been done in Oregon since. It was Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Zinfandel, and just a splash of Nebbiolo. The following spring in '89, we opened up to the general public. And we have been open since April of '89, ever since. I took over as winemaker in '97. Spent about 10 years here in Ashland working, then decided to take some time off and work overseas, and spent about 8 years working in California and Australia, and then about 7 seasons working in the Marlborough region of New Zealand. I came back sort of on and off to Oregon starting in 2011, where I would do half the year here, half the year overseas, but then came back full-time to Weisinger Family in 2015. And that sort of brings us where we are today.
How did your father choose that property? It's really close in. It's beautiful. It's just a gorgeous spot. You can see the entire end of that narrow valley that we live in. How did he know to plant there? It was early.
Yeah, well, my Father John has always sort of been a pioneer. He's been an early adopter, and it seems to always be slightly ahead of the curve. He had been interested in growing grapes and producing wine since he was a kid. Originally from a tiny little town, actually isn't so tiny anymore, but just north of Houston, called Conroe. They grew wild grapes on the family ranch there, and that was his first foray into producing wine. It just was always something that was in the back of his mind. So in the late 70s, when he came to Ashland, he was specifically looking for a piece of land where he could plant a vineyard. And you've been out here to this property. It's a really special place. I've been here for a very long time and still haven't gotten tired of the view, which you can see on the green screen behind you there. It's just a very special spot.
Yeah, thank you. So, over the last couple of years since you've sort of taken over, what plantings do you have now? What acreage? What sort of wines are you making?
Yeah, so when we finished planting out the available acreage that we had, and those plantings were finished about 1983. We had planted about 4.5 of the 10 acres, all in Gewürz. And then in 2004, early 2004, I took a trip up to Abastella, up in the Umpqua. Earl Jones has been a long-time family friend. Spent an afternoon up there tasting Tempranillo, which up until that point in time, I really had very little experience with. It was after that experience with Earl that I felt that we needed to diversify what we were growing on the estate. And so the following year, we replanted about half of the Gewürz to Tempranillo, and then we took the other half and planted it to Pinot Noir. We chose clone 777 Pinot Noir because it does tend to deal with heat a little bit better than some of the other clones. Then in 2011, we started a small vineyard management.
You didn't just
no, we
over, you replanted.
Yeah,
Wow.
and the reason for that is all the Gewürz that we had planted were self-rooted.
Okay.
So this was early days. Okay. In fact, the original planting of Gewürz from 1978 we still have. It's just under an acre, and I just really can't, for personal reasons, ever rip it. It's part of our history, and it's so we still produce an Alsatian style Gewürz every year. So we replanted basically about 2/3 of the property, Tempranillo and Pinot Noir, and Tempranillo really was the one that was indicating to us, based upon what other people were doing with it, particularly Earl and some others in the Umpqua, that it potentially had a home here. And anyway, so then in 2011, we started a small vineyard management company and began taking on other small vineyards directly in the Ashland area. Mm-hmm. And that's a real important thing for us, is that almost all the fruit that we work with, we manage, and it comes from within about 3 to maybe 5 miles of where we are. So what we produce here at Weisinger Family is a local product, so very, very local to the Ashland area. So one of these that's interesting with terroir in this region is it's very diverse. So for example, the soil that we have here on the estate is sort of a clay loam, and under it we have a bunch of sandstone. So the vines here on the estate get about, 14, 16 inches of topsoil, and then they're directly into rock. One of the other vineyards that we look after is maybe half to a third of a mile as a crow flies. It's all decomposed granite and these granite boulders. Across the valley from us, about 2 miles north, it's all clay. Wow. So even though we're in such a small region, wow, the diversity of the terroir is incredible. And that is really one of the unique characteristics of the Rogue area.
And you see that expressed in the wine? Absolutely.
So there's just, I gotta think about this real quick. There's so there are 3 grapes. Three of the four red varieties that we focus on here. And we focus on these 3 red varieties because over the last 31 years, these are the ones that sort of keep coming back as, hey, this is really good. And it's only been probably in the last 15 years that we've been really not just paying attention, but also having the opportunity to work with these. Those varieties are Tempranillo, Grenache, Syrah, and Malbec. So we get our Tempranillo from 2 different sources. We get our Grenache from 2 different sources, Syrah from 2 different sources, and Malbec. Up until recently, we got it from 2. So, yeah, and we're still in the discovery phase. You know, after 31 years, I've been doing this professionally for I think 20 some odd years now. And I think one thing I'm sure of is that when I first started out, I was aware of this much that I was unaware of. Now I'm aware that there's this much I'm unaware of. So it's sort of it's a career where there's constant discovery.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's part of the craft and the art of what you do for a living, that you are always seeking that perfection in your wine, and you're always responding to a set of circumstances that may change.
Yeah, it's the old saying that wine making is the art of the intelligent compromise. And the reason is because whenever you aren't in control of a situation, you have to compromise. And in wine making, the most influencing factor is always going to be the weather. Yeah. And the weather is something you will never control. So therefore, by nature, you're going to have to compromise always. The art is to do it as intelligently as possible.
And I've appreciated too that you've had experience here in the Valley long enough to have weathered some smoky summers, and have looked at winemaking with respect to smoke, and still come out with award-winning wines. So thank you.
Yeah, well, it's always a challenge.
It's always a challenge. And that might be a good segue to go into your winemaking style. You certainly want to express the nature of the grapes, the terroir. What are you looking for in making wine? What are your gold standards that you're working towards?
So the first, I think the first critical decision that happens is picking. You know, when do you pick? I personally think that generally, depending on what a winemaker is shooting for in terms of ripeness, that ripeness window can be 48 to maybe 96 hours, depending on what's happening, heat, rain, all that kind of stuff. So that decision is absolutely key. We obviously, like everyone else, we look at sugar, we look at acid, we look at flavor. We also look at 2 other things. We look at the texture of the skins, mm-hmm. and we look at the seeds. Mm-hmm. Around here, it gets pretty hot, and depending on the year, sometimes you can achieve sugar ripeness with fruit before you get to physiological ripeness. And in an ideal situation, you would have both. So if we hit sugar ripeness, but the seeds don't look or feel like they should, we'll actually hold off. So that's an example of making a compromise. So we're going to compromise higher sugars, which potentially means higher alcohol. Right. But doing so, we lessen the risk of some of those harsher tannins that you can get from seeds that aren't fully mature. Once the fruit comes in, we of course hand hand sort everything. With the whites, almost exclusively, we do whole cluster pressing.
Mm-hmm.
We do, depending on the type of white, it'll either go into tank where it goes through a temperature controlled fermentation. The majority of our whites, however, go into neutral French oak. Even our Sauvignon Blanc, which we'll taste here. So with the whites, it's about acidity, it's about freshness, but it's also about texture. We also, about 60–70% of the time, we're using native yeast. So that's generally how all of our fermentations start. Is we let them kick off on their own, at their own pace. We'll track them, smell them, and taste them. Occasionally we'll come in afterwards and add a commercial yeast, but the vast majority of what we do is all native ferment. As for the reds, they're destemmed as gently as possible. We do all open top fermenters, kind of like this one sitting here behind me. We usually do 3 to 5 day cold soak period. So we just chill the juice down with the skins, extract as much color as possible. Color is a real important thing for us. I like color. It also gives a chance to pull some of those wonderful water soluble tannins out.
Okay.
Again, once that 3 to 5 day period is over, we kind of let things warm up, they kick off on their own. We're typically punching down the skins 2, maybe 3 times. You know, we just, when the fermentation is over, we'll either let it sit on the skins. Again, tannin integration is something we focus in on. And I think part of that comes from a history of, in the early days, some of the processing equipment that we used was extremely rough on the fruit. And so in the early days, 88 through probably 94, everyone in this area produced some really tannic wines because the technology with processing equipment just wasn't anything like it is today. I mean, we basically had a distemmer that we joked was a food processor.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. I didn't realize that. So that's a
so then after.
I didn't realize.
So it's when we go back with our staff and when we do tastings of these older vintages, when we line up cabs, so Cabernet Sauvignon for 88, because we produce cabs every year from 88 till about 2011. And when you taste through those, and often they were from the exact same vineyard, from 88 to about 94 is this one sort of style of cab. In 94, the change that happened is how we approached ripening. So we started picking our cab riper. So there's a big change there. From 94 to 2004, there was that period. In 2005 is when we purchased all new processing equipment, and the wines changed again. So tannin has been a real focus for us. With the reds, we generally keep them in barrel from anywhere from 14 to at the very most 20 months. And in the last few years, probably last 4 or 5 years, what we've attempted to do is be able to give those bottled wines at least a full year in bottle. And with our reserve wines, we give them at least 2 years.
Okay. So you're really intentionally managing those tannins, and you're looking at a longer aged wine in order to kind of soften it.
Yeah, I mean I mean I love all, all wines as long as they're good. Um, and but there's something about drinking wine that has a little bit of age on it, and that's what I prefer. I think that's kind of becoming our style, and it seems to work for us. And I think that's something that every brand has to figure out on their own, and it takes time. Is what works for you? What works for the grapes that you're working with in the region where you are. Do you have the time to let things age, or do you have to just get things out the door real quick? I mean, those are all preferences.
Some economics too.
Oh yeah, definitely economics. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love that you have the history to understand and to make those changes over time. That's so unusual.
It's in this region it's unique, and in this region we're very fortunate to have that. I was just in Bordeaux in January. I spent a week there, and it was specifically to go visit chateaus and talk to different winemakers. And in our region here in the Rogue, if you've been making wine or in the wine business for 20 plus years, you're considered the old guy. And in Bordeaux, if you've been making wine for less than 100 years, you're still the new kid. So that was pretty humbling,
Yeah.
but it was incredible to sit down and talk to these wine makers who were fifth and sixth generation.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, thank you for the clarity that you presented. That over the last year or two, what changes have you seen, or what changes are you working towards in the future? One big event that occurred for all of us this last year has been COVID. Can you include your response to how you managed affairs during COVID in this part?
Yeah. So it's been a challenge, I think, as it has been for every business. During the period where Oregon was in lockdown, of course, our tasting room was closed. We did have to adjust, and so we adjusted to a lot of online, and that has been surprisingly positive. We, of course, were doing pickups. We were doing home deliveries. We just did what we had to do, and we're still in this period. So we're constantly adjusting. It's not the sort of thing that there's a roadmap of
Right.
any sort, but we're getting through it.
Okay.
And we've weathered other storms, so we'll weather this one as well.
Yeah, I can think of several storms that you've weathered in regard. But tell me what other changes you're looking at in terms of either the property or the vineyard. Are you looking towards organic or changing any of your processing? You talked about 2005 getting new equipment in that kind of revolutionized what you were doing and how you were doing it. Are you looking at any other changes moving forward?
Yes, and I think it's important for a winery to always be thinking about how do we do things better, because the technology changes, and so does your experience. Every year you have one more year in. Every year's an opportunity to learn. So we are constantly, with every harvest, looking at trying different techniques, or maybe it's a yeast or a different type of cooper, all those sorts of things. But with regard to the fruit, which is the foundation of it all, we are beginning to switch over to an organic program, and we hope to be fully organic here on our property within a couple of years. And then we're slowly going to convert the other properties that we work with. After that, there's been some discussion that we may look at biodynamics. I have a little bit of experience working with some BD wines down in Australia. I think Cowhorn here in the region has been a great example for BD. I know Troon is on that direction also. I think that approaching your vineyard more holistically is what we would like to do. And also it gives us the opportunity to just simply be better stewards of our land. You know, if I can leave this place in better shape for the next generation, then I feel like I've done what I was supposed to do.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I wonder if this isn't a good time to move into the wines, and maybe you would present your 3 wines.
Sure. All right. Well, what we'll do is we'll start with our 2019 Sauvignon Blanc. This is actually one of the few, in fact, it's the only wine that we produce that actually doesn't come from the Rogue. It comes from the Umpqua. I have a very good friend named Stephen Russell, who has his own little winery up there. And Stephen is gracious enough every year to sell me a couple tons. He grows wonderful fruit. I was attracted to his fruit when I had it about 3 years ago. Sauvignon Blanc is a variety that I've worked with a lot down in the southern hemisphere. And the style that we do with this is going back to what I was saying earlier about our whites. The goal is to have plenty of acid with texture and freshness. And so with the Stabby, we pick it when it's fairly what would be considered not underripe, but not ripe. So we're bringing this in at 21.5 bricks, 22 bricks. We want to keep that alcohol in that high 12, low 13. And it isn't because I think producing low alcohol wines is better. It's just that every component of a wine has a place. Alcohol has a place, acid has a place, freshness has a place, tannin has a place. And the goal is to get all those sort of in the right or in a correct composition. So Sauvignon Blanc, first and foremost, should smell like Sauvignon Blanc. You know, there are certain varieties that, you know, you can say, yeah, maybe this smells like Pinot Gris, maybe it doesn't smell like Pinot Gris. And don't get me wrong, for all you Pinot Gris lovers, I love Pinot Gris also. But, you know, Sauvignon Blanc is one of those varieties that needs to smell a certain way. So this one in particular is very grassy, has just a little bit of lemon. And I really should be honest here and say that one of the things I don't generally do is I don't tell people what they should be smelling in a wine, just because I think that everyone should discover on their own, but nonetheless, it sometimes is helpful to have a little bit of a hint.
Describing your own palate and
Exactly.
your own style,
Yeah,
and what your goals are for that wine, which is beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, and it also depends. Did I have coffee an hour ago, or what? But you know, it's this one here. One of the things I really enjoy about it is the fact that it also has this lovely texture, and that texture, that little bit of viscosity, comes from the barrel aging and the stirring of the lees that we do. I would say globally, the vast majority of Sauvignon Blanc is produced in stainless steel tanks, and it's crisp, and it's got not racing acidity like a Riesling, but it has acid. And I think that when you can balance that acid with just a little bit of texture, and you can do that through stirring of the lees. So this is put to barrel, almost straight from the press. So typically what will happen is grapes are pressed off, juice goes into a tank, the heavy solids settle out, and then you rack that clean juice back into a barrel, or usually another tank. Well, what we do is we go straight from the press pan into the barrels. So it's cloudy, it's chunky, there's all kinds of things in there, and it does, I think, contribute to some body. And so that's what we shoot for.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The next wine.
You're having wine after breakfast. I'll have it after lunch.
Yeah. Next one I'm going to do is our 2016 Malbec.
Okay.
This particular Malbec is from Gold Vineyard, which is located about 6 miles from us here. This Malbec, so we've been working with Randy Gold, who owns this for a very long time. And Malbec has always been a variety that I had an affinity for. In recent years, it's become quite popular, in part because of the Argentinians and the Chileans, and their ability to import Malbec at a really attractive price point that gets the first time consumer of Malbec drinking it.
Got it.
Someone asked me one time, doesn't it worry you, all these Argentinian Malbecs that are in the grocery stores at $8 to $10 a bottle? And I said, no, absolutely not. In fact, I'm thrilled, because what it does is it opens the door.
Yeah.
You know, you can't begin to sort of move up unless you get in.
Nice.
And so that's how I see it anyway. And so
I have to tell you, Eric, one time I posted out, at Weisinger's tasting a Malbec, and I think I got 50 likes and like 20 comments or something. It was like immediate.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, and it's just been we've been producing Malbec since 2012. That was our first year, or I should say that was the first year that we produced it on its own. I had been working with Malbec since '98.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until 2012 that we had both the acreage and really the quality.
Yeah.
Malbec tends to be a heavy producer in terms of its crop load, and there's different clones, and so it took us a little while to figure those things out. We're still in the process of, but one of the aromatic characteristics I typically get from Malbec is the aroma of ripe or almost stewed blueberries. And so if I get that, in one of our wines, then I feel like, okay, I've hit it, you know. Then it's about the fruit, and I think Malbec needs to be rich in fruit. That richness of fruit can, you know, depending on when you harvest it, and again, the first step is, when do you pick it? And so we tend to pick these fairly ripe. They're in that 24 to 25 brick range. Just because, let's say you have a wine that's maybe 14 and a half, even 15% alc, which seems like a lot. It's only a lot if you can taste it.
Right.
It becomes relevant. This is my own, and it's just how I feel. This isn't a rule, but it only becomes relevant if it's something that stands out. The acid becomes relevant, or it becomes sort of an aspect of the tasting experience that doesn't fit if it stands out. It's like all these things have to all come together. So you can have a wine that's 12% alcohol, super high in acid, and it tastes totally balanced. You can have a wine that's high in alcohol, low in acid, and it can taste balanced. So on the palate, I like that so much I might have another sip. Yeah, so this is a 2016. 2016 was a phenomenal year here. We were very happy with everything, all of our reds. This still, it has these sort of forward tannins, right? There's plenty of fruit on the mid palate, and it's framed by these sort of, you know, some pretty good structure of tannins. What that tells me is, based upon the experience I've had with this particular variety, and more importantly, this particular vineyard, is this one I think is going to probably be at its peak in another 2 or 3 years. This is a wine that very easily could go out 10, 12 years. But it also depends on what you like. I love drinking old wines. I just think the older the better, even if they're a little unusual, because when you drink an old wine, you know, something that's 30, 40, 50 years old, you're drinking a part of history. You don't get to do that every day. It's like almost the only thing in this world that's really a time capsule, you know? So it's like when I taste this, when I smell it and I taste this, I realize that I'm having an opportunity to smell 2016.
Yeah.
I'm tasting 2016, and that's just kind of fun. So this is a wine that I think has a long life. So the third wine that we're going to try here is sort of our flagship. This is our 2017 Tempranillo. We are going to be releasing this vintage here fairly soon. We just sold out of the 2016. So this Tempranillo is off of the estate. And Tempranillo I just love. It's probably one of my favorite varieties. It's one of the unique things about Tempranillo is it can grow anywhere in Oregon. It can grow in Southern Oregon. It can grow in the Applegate. It can grow in the Umpqua, in the Willamette. It can grow in the Rocks area, up along the Columbia River and Hood River. And it's if there was one grape, and a lot of my friends in the Willamette who grow up Pinot will hate that I'm going to say this, but it's probably the one grape that grows the easiest everywhere in Oregon. It may not be in every single region. In fact, it isn't the best grape, because there really is no best grape. There's just great grapes for certain regions.
Mhm.
But here in our little corner of Southern Oregon, it's the one that is the easiest for us to produce. You know, the hardest thing, one of the hardest things in wine making is to do nothing. And that, however, is the goal.
Yeah.
To be more of a wine shepherd than a wine maker. So our Tempranillo, which is growing just right out there, I can see it from here, typically gives us, you know, we're cropping it at about 2.7 to 3.1 tons per acre. Usually comes in September. This one will spend a little bit longer in barrel. I know that sometimes people are kind of curious about, well, what percentage of new oak? So this we'll see, depending on the year. If it's a riper year, we'll use a slightly heavier percentage of new oak. 17 was a warm year, wasn't as warm as 16. So this is about 26% new American oak. This year is in our efforts to continually try things out, and to a large degree, because of my recent trip to France, we're going to be incorporating a little bit of French oak in also, to see how does the Tempranillo play with the French oak as opposed to the American oak.
Nice.
With regard to acidity, now this is a really important or interesting aspect with Tempranillo, and where we grow it here on the estate, is Tempranillo typically will come in fairly high sugars and low acid. Just how it is. That acid will typically drop, not completely drop out, but let's say Sauvignon Blanc that we just had. That's somewhere between 8.5 to maybe 10 grams per liter acid. So it's, you know, rosé is in that 8 to 10 range also. This will be more like 3.5 to 4 grams per liter acid when it's right, unless it comes from our estate. You know, I don't know why. I don't know. It's just how it is. But every year, and we produce probably half a dozen Tempranillos. You know, a couple for ourselves, and we do contract work for others. But our Tempranillo always comes in at about 6 grams per liter acid, which is perfect. It's just, one of my theories is that I think it has to do with the fact that it gets really hot here during the day, but because we're at, you know, 2160 in the evenings, it gets pretty cool. You know, we see a 30 to 40 degree difference in temperature, and that swing, that diurnal swing, is one of the things that helps to retain acid within fruit. So, and having that higher acidity helps the wine to age. And that's why our Tempranillos age beautiful. And they also, you know, taste pretty good also.
Won quite a few awards.
Well, we have a really good team here, and it isn't, you know, in any winery, it's not just the wine maker, but it's everyone who touches the fruit to help grow it. It's really a team effort.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for this morning. I've so enjoyed seeing you face to face, more closer than we ordinarily would, and I've loved hearing hearing you talk about your wines and about your winemaking.
Well, thank you.
It's really important.
It's great seeing you, and thanks for having me.
Okay.
Cheers.